The 19th of Kislev. Just like that?
Yep.
Yutes Kislev is an anniversary of the liberation of the Alter Rebbe from Tsarist imprisonment about 200 years ago. And it's considered the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidic thought, Hasidic life. Like Rosh Hashanah of creation, when the world was created, there's a Rosh Hashanah for when Hasidus established itself. In fact, this day is called the holiday of holidays. Hasidim call it the holiday of holidays. And this created a little bit of controversy, like always. How can you say such a thing? There are, holidays in the Torah, beginning with Pesach. How can you say that something that happened 200 years ago is greater than the holidays of the Torah? Shavuos, Sukkot, Pesach. How can you say this is the holiday of holidays? The mother of all holidays. But that comes from an erroneous and very sad assumption that the world just keeps going down and gets worse with every generation. In some way, that is true, of course, because we're getting further away from the event at Sinai. But it can't be that it's all negative and we're making no progress. If every generation gets worse, what are we looking forward to? So it really can't be. So one of the ways to appreciate how something can be great today, even though we're late in history, when the Torah says about Noach, that Noach was a tzaddik, there's an opinion among the sages that, well, yeah, he was a tzaddik in his generation because they were so bad. But if Noach was in the generation, lived in the generation of Avraham, he would be considered nothing, which is a pretty extreme opinion. How do you go from the Torah saying he's a tzaddik and then you reduce him down to nothing? You could say in the days of Avraham, he would be a secondary. Avraham would be a bigger tzaddik. But to say he would be nothing? Torah says he's a tzaddik. How do you do that? How can any of the sages say, well, not really? And why would anybody say that? What's the point? What do we gain by that? And why do we need to know that? Even if it were true, what do we gain by knowing that? There's no question. If Noach lived in the times of Abraham, what would Noach be? A tzaddik. What the sages are saying, or at least according to this opinion, if Noach lived in the time of Avram, and he was the same tzaddik that he was in his generation, being a tzaddik was considered nothing in the time of Avraham. Not that he wouldn't be a tzaddik. Not that he would be considered nothing. Being a tzaddik would be considered nothing. Because what is the simple meaning of tzaddik? Not the Hasidic meaning, the simple meaning. The simple meaning of tzaddik is a person who does what he needs to do. If you follow the commandments, what are you? You're a tzaddik. If you follow them consistently, big tzaddik. But tzaddik means righteous. You do what is right. In the times of Noach, what were the commandments? There were 7 commandments. He kept them all. Okay, he's a tzaddik. More than that, he built the ark and he went into the ark when nobody else believed. So there's no question that if Noach lived in the times of Avram, he would do everything he was told to do and be a tzaddik. But that would be considered nothing. Why? Because in the times of Avram, there was a new and unprecedented availability of godliness, which in the times of Noach did not exist, so that Noach got as close to God as was possible at that time. But from time to time, new gates in heaven open up, God becomes more available, and then you can serve God in a completely different way, more intimate, closer. When a new opportunity opens up and you don't adjust to that new reality, then what you were before, as great as it is missing the boat. Like in a marriage, if something happens to the husband and suddenly he becomes available or more available, and the wife does not respond, it's not only missing the boat, it's insulting. So when God makes himself more available and you remain the same as you were before, then you're nothing. You're not keeping up. What became available in the times of Avraham? Everybody believed in God. We get the impression that in the times of Avraham, nobody believed in God. Not possible. Not possible. The people in the times of Avraham were great-grandchildren of Noach. They didn't know that he was in an ark. They didn't know that there was a flood. They didn't know that he was a tzaddik. Noach was still alive when Avraham was an adult. How could they not know? And Noach probably knew Adam. So what? There was no opportunity to forget about God. The world was new. The information was firsthand. Noach heard from Adam, and Noach told Avram. There was no question that everybody knew that there was a creator and that God was the creator and so on. But everybody was worshiping idols. Not because they didn't believe in God. They didn't believe in one God. They didn't believe that there is one God you can turn to for everything. They believed that God was awesome. God was the creator. He created little gods, and he is retired or whatever, busy with other things. So if you want to worship God, that's wonderful. But if you need a little assistance, you need a cure, or you need some money, or you can't ask God. You got to ask your local God. So they had a God for every occasion. And they referred to God as the God of gods. So what did Avraham actually teach people? That there's a God? That there is one God. In other words, your relationship with God has to be monogamous because it's personal and it's all-consuming, like a marriage. That availability, which the Torah calls recognizing God, not believing in God. When Avraham was 3 years old, he recognized God. Noach couldn't do that. Not because of personal failure, but because it simply was not yet available. God had not made himself that knowable until the times of Avram. That's why it says that if Noach lived in the generation of Avram, not compared to Avram himself. We're not comparing Noach to Avram. We're comparing generation to generation. The generation of Noach did not have this access. The generation of Avram did have this access. Unfortunately, nobody took advantage of it except Avram. But in that generation, it was available. And if you didn't recognize God, you were missing the boat, even if you kept all the commandments. Still, why do we need to know this? How is this relevant? Well, let's continue the theme. If Noach lived in the times of Avram and didn't change, he remained the same, he would be a tzaddik, but that would be irrelevant. Now, if Avram lived in the times of Moshe and he didn't change, he would be considered nothing. He was given one mitzvah, circumcision. Moshe was given 613. If Avraham continued to practice what he had practiced, one mitzvah, as holy as he was, as awesome as he was, missed the boat. You can assume safely that if Noach lived in the times of Avram, he would adjust. What the opinion is saying, that if he didn't adjust, he would be nothing. But he probably would adjust. Same with Avram. If Avraham lived in the times of Moshe, he would get with the program. He would keep 613 mitzvahs, not just one. Well, let's continue. If Moshe lived in the times of Rabbi Akiva, but he continued to be Moshe, which means he continued to study Chumash, the written Torah, and not the Mishnah and not the Gemara. He would be missing the boat. In fact, according to Kabbalah, Rabbi Akiva was a reincarnation of Moshe because Moshe needed to study the oral Torah. He was only good at the written. We can continue like this through history. Every time a new gate in heaven opens up and God becomes more available, you got to go with the new program or you miss the boat. And then you're nothing. Which means if we're not progressing in making the world godly in bringing God down to earth, we're missing the whole. It's nothing. It's nice to be holy. It's good to be a tzaddik. It's good to know the Torah that is written. It's good to know the oral Torah. If you're not getting closer to Mashiach, you're not going anywhere. So it's not an exaggeration to say you're nothing. Because if you're not with the program, then it's nothing. So the anniversary of Yutes Kislev, of Hasidus, is no less significant than the anniversary of creation. In fact, it's much more significant. When the world was created, it was a great potential for godliness, but no godliness had happened. By the time Yutes Kislev happened, there was a lot of godliness in the world. There had been many, many great holy people who made the adjustment and were getting closer and closer to Mashiach. Yutes Kislev is one of those giant steps towards Mashiach. So if Rabbi Akiva or the Rambam lived in the times of the Baal Shem Tov and didn't get with the program, so let's understand what happened on Yutes Kislev. On Yutes Kislev, we were granted our light and our life. There was a part of our soul that was not available. With all the greatness, with all the scholars, with all the holy people, there was still a part of the soul that was just not available to the average person until Yutes Kislev. On Yutes Kislev, we were granted access to our soul. Unprecedented. And it didn't happen easily. The Alter Rebbe had to risk his life. And the Varaleya had to give her life for this to happen. What exactly does that mean? We always had our soul, the godly soul that is a little piece of God. Nobody knew. Nobody knew that the godly soul was a piece of God. We just thought it was the good soul versus the bad soul. So the first thing that happened is the Alter Rebbe was permitted from heaven to reveal the nature of the godly soul. That it is, in fact, a little piece of God. That revolutionized Jewish life. In more practical terms, we always had the soul, but we didn't have access. We always had it, we didn't know what it was. We called it a Yetzer Tov. But it's so much more. So, what was given to us through Hasidus at the time of Yutes Kislev was the light and the life of our soul. The light means insight, wisdom. We were enlightened about our soul. We were told that we could actually understand our soul. Much of the Jewish population at that time found it hard to believe and thought it was a cult. Being told that the godly soul is a little piece of God kind of meant that you're never going to understand it now. If it's a piece of God, then you can't possibly understand it, which means it's not available to you. It's not accessible. It's a great thing, but don't get any ideas. You're never going to know it. You're never going to understand it. That's the enlightenment, the light of our soul, which means the intelligence. And then there is the energy or the life, and that means the enthusiasm, the inspiration, the feeling for godliness, that we can actually feel our soul and understand it. That is such a huge step in the process of bringing God down to earth. On the one hand, we realize that the soul is literally a piece of God, and on the other hand, study it, get to know it, experience it, get to feel it. This is radical stuff. Of course, since the Alter Rebbe, 7 generations later, this stuff has become common knowledge. Every yeshiva girl and every yeshiva boy can tell you all about it with sophisticated vocabulary. It's as familiar as any other topic that you study in school, any school. So here's what took so long for this to become known. And for many generations, it was considered highly secretive, privileged information. Only 1 or 2 people in a generation, among scholars, among sages, among tzaddikim, were allowed to know this. And they were not allowed to share it. Here's the punchline of it. How can godliness come down to earth? How can godliness exist in an ungodly world? How can it? They're so different. They're so diametrically incompatible. It's an oxymoron. You can't make an ungodly world godly. You can't turn negative into positive. You can't. Or let's put it differently. The positive cannot transform the negative. They're opposites. Good can't make bad good. Because good is the denial of bad, and bad is the denial of good. So imagine you're very, very good. Will that transform the bad things in you into good? No. It'll overwhelm it, but it can't transform it. Now, people say, if you're nice to bad people, they'll become better people. Yeah. Because you're adding goodness to their menu, but the bad in them hasn't gone away, hasn't become good. And if there's a crisis or if there's a trauma, all the evil will come right back and you're back to where you started from. In a sense, if you've learned Tanya, you see this in the description of the Beinoni. What is a Beinoni? He is very good. He does everything he's supposed to do in his actions, in his speech, and in his thoughts. He is absolutely perfect. But the bad is bad, and he's got to always be vigilant because it can always reassert itself. Which means being good does not transform what is bad. It outweighs it, but it can't change it. Does that make sense? How can the good change the bad? Bad is bad, good is good. So you say, well, what if you have a lot of good? Okay, so you have more good than bad. You haven't changed the bad. So how is a world that is ungodly ever going to become godly? It's a pretty dramatic statement, but godliness cannot turn the godless into godly because they're opposites. Opposites means they don't blend, they don't cooperate, they don't. So no matter how much godliness you introduce into the world, the world will look better. There's more godliness. The ungodly is ungodly. How is that going to change? So for most of history, we were content with the thought that there will come a time when the godly will be more prominent than the ungodly. And that's as good as it gets. And then people thought, when that happens, the ungodly will die out. And we will be left only with the good guys. That doesn't mean you transform the evil. You didn't transform it. It went away somewhere. But wherever it is still bad. That's one of the things that the Baal Shem Tov revolutionized. It's not enough to have more good than bad. The world was not created for that. The world was created particularly that the evil should become good. If you just kill it, you've ruined the whole plan. That's what Bruria said to her husband. Sins have to die, not sinners. The sinners have to become good. So if good cannot transform the bad, if godliness cannot transform the ungodly, how will the world become right? In very simple language, No amount of godliness can do it. You have to have God himself. If you bring God himself into the world, that can transform the evil. Why? God is not the opposite of evil. God is not the opposite of ungodly. God is everything. There is no opposite to God. So in God, all things are included. When you bring God himself into the picture, the evil will become godly. You see how radically different our job is? For all the years, all of history, bringing godliness to the world was the project. God came down to Mount Sinai. Moshe went up the mountain and he brought godliness down to the world. 10 commandments, 613 commandments, lots of godliness. And that was the height of the relationship with God at that time. Since that time, it has become clear, and particularly through Hasidus, godliness, that's for the 60s. Godliness was a big deal in the 60s. Not anymore. You've missed the boat if you're still looking for godliness. Now it's God himself. Why? Because God himself has made himself available. If you don't respond, you miss the boat. So in the times of Noach, if you wanted to be what you were supposed to be, you had to get into an ark. Those who didn't get into the ark lost. In the times of the patriarchs, there was a ladder that stood on earth and reached into heaven. If you climb the ladder, you're good. You don't climb the ladder, you lose. In the times of Moshe, there was a mountain. If you go to the top of the mountain, you'll find godliness. You don't go to the top of the mountain? In the times of Rabbi Akiva, if you're a scholar, and if you know the whole Gemara by heart, then you're a something. If you don't, you missed it. In the times of the Baal Shem Tov, if you could perform miracles, you were something special. Can't perform miracles? No. That's why when the Alter Rebbe came along and started teaching Chabad, he said, I don't do miracles. He wasn't talking about himself. He was saying that form of godliness that the Baal Shem Tov introduced, that's for the Baal Shem Tov. Now, in this generation, or 2 generations later, miracles is not going to do it. Not that there aren't miracles, but that's not the best way to serve God. Because God is more available than an act of God on occasion, which is what a miracle is. So the Rebbe says, go out in the street, stop people, and ask them to do a mitzvah. Don't you want to know if he climbed the ladder? No, there's no ladder. You want to know if he went up to the top of the mountain? Or the mountain came to him or whatever? No. You want to know if he's a scholar? No. You want to know if he washed Negelwasser? No. Well, then what's going on? What's going on is God is so available. Just do the mitzvah. He's right here. You don't have to become something special. You don't have to rise in your level of godliness when you have God himself. The result is, all over the world, people who have no business being interested in God because they have no godliness, but they want to serve God. Jews, non-Jews, everywhere. So the reality of the world today, as a result of Yutes Kislev, is that you don't have to get into an ark, you don't have to climb a ladder, you don't have to climb a mountain, you don't have to memorize the entire Talmud, you don't have to be a Beinani. God is so much more available that whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are, just respond to him. And he doesn't require any preparations because he is everything and everywhere. So is this the holiday of holidays? Yeah. Because if you're still practicing only the holidays that existed before, you could be missing the boat. So what does it mean that every generation gets lower? We're actually getting closer. We're getting lower in the godliness, getting closer to God himself. Both things are true. We're not the scholars of Rabbi Akiva. We're not the holy individuals like Moshe. We're not patriarchs or matriarchs. So yeah, we've lost a lot of talents. We don't have qualities of godliness. But when God is so available, don't be distracted by godliness. React to God himself. And if you want to compare it to a marriage, the first years of a marriage, you grow towards each other in qualities. You understand a little more, you become more tolerant, you become more accustomed, you adjust to each other. Eventually, when the marriage is matured, it's just us. There's no talent. If you need a talent, then you haven't really bonded with each other. You're still practicing. Got to stop practicing eventually. Got to get there eventually. And that's what Mashiach means. Mashiach means we've arrived. We're not doing godliness. We're being his. So the biggest change, the most dramatic change, in the times of Mashiach, we will not be commanded to do mitzvahs. Because commandments are necessary only when you have two people with two different opinions. How do I know what you want if you don't tell me? That's fine at the beginning of a marriage. But eventually, you still have to tell me what you want? Don't I know it by now? Haven't I gotten to be merged with you so that you don't have to tell me? So when Mashiach comes, there will be no commandments. There'll just be the mitzvahs. So we will keep Shabbos. Because it's a commandment? No, because it's Shabbos. I think that this is what it means that Mashiach is going to come unexpected. Here we talk about Mashiach all the time. How is he going to arrive unexpected? The fact that we talk about Mashiach all the time is not a good sign. If something is really, really natural, why are you talking about it so much? Be it. Don't talk it. Mashiach is not a project. If you treat it like a project, you're missing the boat.
Didn't the Rabbi see it like that? Didn't the Rabbi see it like that? Didn't the Rabbi see it like a project?
No.
And he spoke about it a lot on stuff.
And never made it a project.
What did you think?
Very carefully, never made it a project.
What's the project?
Oh, Tefillin campaign was a project. Lighting Shabbos candles was a project. The Rebbe wanted reports. How are you doing it? What are you doing? How many people? With Mashiach, there was no such. Mashiach was the thing, not a project. Mashiach wasn't even a belief anymore. Don't believe in Mashiach, thank you very much. Because if you believe in it, then it's still not here. And that exactly is what Mashiach is. So natural that when he arrives, after all the talk about him, it will be so natural you'll barely notice. Because if it's not that natural, something's wrong. It's just another godliness, religiosity or something. It's not Mashiach. I think that's what that famous little story about somebody asked a Rebbe or somebody, what if Mashiach comes and I won't accept him? And the Rebbe said, if you don't accept him, I won't accept him. What does that mean? If it's not obviously clear that Mashiach is here, then he's not here. You say, I accept him, you don't accept him. Oh, that is that another project we're doing here? The same is true with God himself. If somebody said, I don't believe in God. The God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. In fact, if you have to believe in him, it's not God. That's good for the times of Noach. we've made some progress since then.
So in other words, when we say that this is the heel of the Ignis of Mashiach, it's the heel's actually holding the body. It's not really.
That's the heel. We got to
He
get
was
past the
holding
heel,
up the whole
right?
body.
We've,
But for Ignis of the Mashiach, then we're holding, you
yeah,
know,
yeah, but we've been the heel for a long time. It's
I know.
enough already.
I know.
Yeah, I hope we've moved past that. So now, the idea, the principle of serving God has become a reality. We're not growing in our godliness. We're serving Him. Him can make the evil good. Godliness can't. So to sum it up, it works something like this. When Mashiach comes, every stone will tell you about God. Every tree. It says that after Mashiach comes, if somebody is about to pick a fruit from a tree on Shabbos, the tree is going to say, hey, it's Shabbos. What does that mean? I don't think stones are going to talk. You feel bad for the stone? Here's how it is. You look at a stone, and the stone says, I am a creation. That's all it does. I mean, what else does a stone do? It presents itself. I was created. When you look at a stone and you think, oh, that's a creation. If there's a creation, then there's a creator. You don't have to be a genius for that. If there is a creator, then there's a purpose. If there's a purpose, then there's a will. Well, it's a purpose that God wants. If there's a want, then there's a pleasure. Because a want fulfilled equals pleasure. So what do we now know? The stone just told me that God is getting pleasure from his creation. And now I'm going to pick a fruit on Shabbos. So again, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? Looking at a stone will tell you that God's deepest, greatest pleasure, which produced the world, is waiting for you to respond. So if God comes and says, you are my pleasure, what are we supposed to say? I mean, if we're not callous, and God says, you are my pleasure, and we say,
I am.
why? What do you want? That's callous. That would maybe be the answer in the times of Noah. Today, God says, you are my pleasure. What? How are you going to respond?
Unbelievable. I'm so happy. Unbelievable.
Well, I am. That would be just my natural. I am. But that's not enough.
You're kidding.
Yeah, but there's some
Nah, you're kidding.
recognition with that. It's just,
See, again, that would be if we were still worlds apart. Right?
Mhm.
If we were worlds apart and God says, you're my pleasure, like hard to believe. Nah, not really, right? You say that to everybody.
Hmm.
It does. But at this point in history, if God says, you are my pleasure, our natural response would be, you're my pleasure. What else can you say? I'm yours. What do you say? Well, I'm yours. That's what we're up to in current events. So yes, Yutes Kislev is the holiday of holidays. It gives all the holidays in Torah their substance, their richness. Can we be optimistic about the future? Even if you listen to the news. Absolutely, you can. Because God set this ship, planet Earth, God set this ship on a path. And he doesn't change it. So the ship is headed for Jerusalem, which from here is towards the east. So the world is moving towards Jerusalem. But it's a big ship. On the ship, there are people who very purposefully, very determined, are walking towards the west. Are you worried that the ship is going to change course? The ship is not changing course. There's one guy who's Farbrengen. He thinks he's going west. Do the man a favor. Turn him around and get him to enjoy the trip because he's going anyway. You're going east, turn around. Now, let's say everyone in the ship, everyone on board is going towards the west. Are you worried? The ship is going east, even if everyone thinks they're going west. So what are you worried about? On the other hand, if you know that the ship is going east and you see people walking towards the west, you have no compassion. You don't care. Out of love of a fellow human being, you should stop them and say, hey, excuse me, we're going that way. Get with the program. But that's what a mitzvah is. You stop a guy in the street and you say, come put on tefillin. Why? Because that's the direction you're going in anyway. You might as well do it consciously. You might as well do it actively. Because that's where you're going. It's like a teenager who says, I don't want to grow up. What do you do? Say, okay, don't. No, you're going to.
Yeah.
Just do it right. Not like I'm telling you to grow up. You're growing up. So
Benefits come with it.
we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
But we should be considerate of those people who are directionally challenged. The exciting thing was in Israel, I spoke to the least observant, and they were very excited about the idea that you're actually doing for God because he needs. And then I spoke to people in Meir Sha'arim in Yiddish, same message, same excitement, because they never heard that before. Oh, and then I was in Puerto Rico 2 weeks before that, speaking to a church. the biggest church in Puerto Rico. They invited me, they brought me down there, spoke to them twice, and basically said, getting to heaven is not a good goal. Bring God down to earth. They said, okay, 2,000 years of indoctrination about getting to heaven.
Hmm.
It's amazing how one concept, one message is so life-changing for anyone who hears it. You listen, you watch the clips of the Rebbe by dollars, and it's so clear that the Rebbe would not tolerate a single criticism. Do good, do more good, do better. Never a criticism. So a rabbi came to the Rebbe, and he said that we need to pray for the Jewish people because there's a lot of poverty. He traveled a little bit and he saw different communities, and he says there's a lot of poverty. We have to pray that people should have, because they don't have livelihoods, because when they daven, they don't really pay attention. So the Rebbe said, I don't understand. Are you for them, against them? You want them to have more, and then you blame them for not having? What'd you just do? Are you friend or foe? So he said to the Rebbe, so what should they do? He said they should give more tzedakah before they daven. And he said, and then daven with kavanah. The Rebbe said, no. Get off that theme. Stop blaming them. It's hard. And most recently, I saw this clip. Some guy comes and says to the Rebbe, you know, the Romans were evil and they got wiped out, and the Babylonians were evil and they got wiped out, and this, the Greeks were evil and they got wiped. So the same thing is going to happen to the United States. Oh. And the Rebbe said, what kind of job is this for a Jew to go around cursing nations? What are you doing? If everything goes well for the people in America, it'll be better for the Jews too. Why are you looking for suffering? Why are you looking for, what is this? That was so different. In fact, one guy, he was quoting Tanya to me, and I don't know, with the Streimel, and he's quoting Tanya, and I said to him, boy, you're becoming a Lubavitcher. He says, don't you get it? Hasidus doesn't belong to you anymore. It's public property now. Yeah. So let's enjoy the ride. It's exciting. And if we can turn a few people around to face in the right directions, which they're going anyway, that would be a big mitzvah. Friends, don't let friends face the wrong way. The world is going in a good direction. Don't believe the news. Somebody said, but it can't be that the news is all wrong. If they would report that 50% of the people are bad, it would be believable. Not true, but believable. The news makes it sound like there is nothing but bad people. Come on, that is not true. In fact, there are more good people than bad people. It's not 50-50. So obviously, they're not telling you the truth. It just gives a very bad impression on life itself. No, it's not true. The Alter Rebbe basically was talking to a generation of people who were highly motivated, very religious, very devout, very spiritual, but they didn't have a consistent philosophy. So what am I doing? How do I do this? What if I sinned once, twice? No. So the Rebbe had to bring Hasidic thinking to people who were already religious, already steeped in Jewish knowledge. And he had to move them past that. So the first message was, stop trying to be a tzaddik. You can just frustrate yourself. Be a Beinani. Try being a Beinani. Right? That's like.
Not a given.
So he writes a book called the Book of the Beinani. Sefer Shel Beinani. And he tells you how do you become a Beinani and what to do and how the Beinani functions and what the problems of a Beinani are. And then in the end, he says, you know what? The real purpose for our existence here on earth is to bring God down to earth and to make the world a dwelling place for him. So don't be a Beinani. Just make. So in the end, it's not about being a tzaddik. It's not about being a Beinani. It's not about being anything. It's about God having what he needs. The Rebbe brought that out so strongly that it's not about becoming something. And that's why everybody should be encouraging others. Like the guy, the Rebbe said, remind your friends to put on tefillin. He said, I don't put on tefillin. The Rebbe said, that's not their fault. That is so radical. What, a guy who doesn't put on tefillin is going to go around telling other people, you're such a hypocrite? How dare you? And the Rebbe says, what? You don't put on tefillin? That's bad enough. So now you're not going to remind your friends? It's such a... It's like getting down to the absolute fundamental truth.
Bare bones.
No shtick, nothing. That's, you don't have to climb the ladder, you don't have to climb the mountain, you don't have to be a scholar, you don't have to believe in God. Be an atheist, gesundheit hate, put on the tefillin.
You gotta love it.
The Rebbe didn't say to check. If he's an atheist, don't put tefillin on with him. No, if he's an atheist, put two tefillin on with him. Okay, here's the punchline. When the Rebbe was a young boy, like 4 years old, he was sitting with his mother on the beach in Russia. And at that time already, there were Jews who were communists, and they were. Anyway, this guy comes over, a man comes over to the Rebbe, 4-year-old, and he says, Ingela, you're wearing such a big yarmulke and it's so hot. It's not comfortable. Take it off. And the Rebbe said, you're not allowed. So the man said, don't worry. The sin will be on my account. The Rebbe said, What's the difference? Who commits the sin?
Wow.
What is it?
That is such a radical departure of everything religious, of every. What do you mean, what's the difference? The difference is whether I'll go to hell or you go to hell. The Rebbe says, what's the difference? Who commits the sin? God doesn't like it. It's a completely different awareness. It's a completely different. By the same token, what's the difference? Who does the mitzvah? Don't you have to be religious before you do the mitzvah? No. Don't you have to at least believe in God? No. God likes the mitzvah. Do it.
Well, you don't believe in them.
Doesn't matter.
Why would you do it?
So many people who say, I really shouldn't do this because I'm not religious and I don't believe in this. And they put them on. And then they start to cry from overwhelming emotion. So believe, don't believe. We're not talking about you. We're talking about God, and He's right here waiting for your mitzvah. So don't make it a project. Don't make it about you. Don't tell me you're going to become. Don't become anything. Let the world become what God needs it to be. We should have lots of good news. When good news makes it into the news, Mashiach is here.